Inhale the memes, exhale the memes, inject the memes into my bloodstream. There are good memes, and there are bad memes. Why has God abandoned us?
I saw a picture on an anarchist capitalist page asking the question, if stealing 100% of someone's labor is slavery, at what percentage is it not slavery? Despite the fact that this is a great question, it raises many concerns regarding the logical consistency with the anarchist capitalist philosophy. It is ironic that the bourgeois ideologues
Well, you've displayed the biggest problems with your reasoning before you've even made your point. You're a fucking collectivist, and your understanding of your ideological opponents is reminiscent of that of a cartoon villain, which is why I find it particularly ironic that you call us ideologues. Also, if you believe that the meme you presented is making a good point, then why are you a socialist? Are you suggesting that slavery is a good thing?
in question, that is, right libertarians, minarchists, and most importantly, anarchist capitalists, say taxation is theft, because it steals the monetary wealth of someone produced by their labor. Thus, they assume that monetary wealth is created by labor, yet they are fine with the capitalist appropriation of wealth produced by labor.
This is a false equivalence because when individualists or just general libertarians refer to the appropriation of the material product of somebody else's labor, what they are referring to is the initiations of force used by the state or any other entity to steal an individual's material. The term labor is used because the person presenting the claim assumes that the viewer understands that all professions are laborers, whether they're entrepreneurs or wage laborers. The problem with your perspective is that you fail to see this in any other context other than the capitalists are appropriating the surplus value, which is not an argument for two main reasons. Surplus value simply doesn't exist. It relies on the value of a market commodity to be based on labor, which it isn't, since value is derived from individual preference, and therefore the industry's demand is driven by marginal utility. And even if value of a commodity was based on the amount of labor put into it, what makes an exchange voluntary or not is whether both sides of the association consent to it. So the business owner making profit is not an act of theft by any definition, even if labor was the force driving a commodity's value.
Even if they disagree with this point, we will see shortly how they must concede the involuntary nature of wage labor regardless.
Let me guess. It's going to go something along the lines of, I'm being oppressed by nature, help me!
Discovering something that doesn't exist.
Selling labor to a business owner is an entirely force-free association on both parts of the exchange. So unless you're going to complain about the state's intervention in the market establishing artificial monopolies and regulating trade to halt innovation which would naturally make production easier, then you don't really have a leg to stand on here. And even if that was going to be your point, you'd be arguing against corporatism, which you and I are in complete agreement. Corporatism sucks almost as bad as socialism.
The bourgeois ideologue quickly answers. Unlike the free market, the government initiates force because of the involuntary nature of this encounter, and because all encounters should be voluntary, for without it these encounters are tantamount to slavery and tyranny, force is unjustified. After all, do you have the right to initiate force against me? But we will take this further. Let us ask if the capitalist class has the right to initiate force.
Nope. No one has the right to initiate force against anyone else for any reason. The entire reason the NAP exists is because the initiation of force is an inherently unjustifiable position, since it requires the creation of a double standard, which is a fundamentally inconsistent position. Also, there is no such thing as a capitalist class. Class politics are just identity politics for economics.
Historically, the capitalist class solidified its position in the world via the forced proletarianization, that is, the process of making one a wage laborer, of indentured servants, serfs, peasants, freed slaves, women, children, American Indians ran off their land, etc.
Then they aren't capitalists. If they used the force of the state to gain a competitive advantage, or for any reason for that matter that they wouldn't have been able to obtain voluntarily, then they are corporatists, not capitalists. The term capitalist class is a well-poisoning term used by Marxists to label things which aren't capitalist as capitalist, even though they have nothing to do with capitalism, and avoid explaining themselves in the process.
This proletarianization of every social or economic class in society is seen by bourgeois ideologues as liberating.
What? Now you're just spewing complete and utter crap. No libertarian has ever said that enslaving people or using the force of the state to proletarianize people, as you put it, is liberating. You haven't even made it to your point yet, and already you've shown yourself to be an intellectually dishonest liar.
Yet, they're free to sell their labor, unlike the slaves, but they're also free from the control of the means of production, just like the slaves.
Complete bogus once again. Consistently, around 80% of all millionaires are self-made, meaning that they became millionaires from nothing. This fact alone debunks the idea that the means of production are a product of class relations and shows us that, well, anyone can become a quote-unquote bourgeoisie. But even with this fact aside, no one is entitled to property of any form, because in order for you to be entitled to property, you must therefore be entitled to the labor required to create that property. And in order to claim that, you must therefore say that you're entitled to slave labor, which, as we've gone over earlier, is a violation of individual self-ownership and therefore is inherently an inconsistent idea and cannot be defended. For this purpose, rights cannot exist in a positive context, since a positive right must necessarily entail the oppression of someone else's rights in the process. Rights, through the nature of things, can only apply to life and autonomy, and every derivative from individual autonomy, since those are the only rights which logically don't create any inconsistencies or internal contradictions. This is yet again another example of Sargon's Law rearing its ugly head, baselessly accusing libertarians of supporting slavery on the grounds of it being liberating, then only moments later advocate for slavery on the grounds of it being liberating.
If the lack of freedom is simply the repression of options,
the lack of freedom is the lack of consent, not the lack of options. And you want to talk about a lack of options? Your system literally puts a gun to the back of people's head and forces them to work. Socialism and communism are the ultimate forms of monopolization. Work for this one corporation or it'll kill you.
then the capitalist initiates force against the mass of wage laborers when it makes inaccessible any other means as to which the wage laborers may maintain their existence.
But as we've established, that's not true. There is no class of people forcing another class out of their class. Even in our corporatist society, there is great mobility of wealth. Now, if we had full free association, in other words, actual capitalism, people would have even more money since no one is being robbed. All of our commodities would be cheaper due to competition creating innovation, and they, of course, would naturally be more innovative as well. And naturally, as a result, less people would become laborers, since production would become even more widely accessible than it already is due to increased innovation, and even more innovative with less labor required to operate it. Which I also find funny because socialists will openly tell you that they believe their system relies on an increase in automation in order to sustain itself, yet since their system seeks to suppress private property and therefore get rid of the competition which incentivizes the innovation that creates automation, their economy has no means to achieve the thing which, in theory, requires to sustain itself. I long for the day when we as a civilization finally can just admit that socialism is nothing more than a giant fucking hot take and move on.
Further, as was already agreed upon, labor creates monetary wealth.
No, selling your labor to someone who's buying it from you does. Let's not create a straw man about the labor theory of value.
This is evident in the ideologues' case against taxation. If they deny this, then there is no argument regarding how taxation is theft. So, if the capitalist appropriates the value created by the laborer, who has no choice but to work under the capitalist conditions to maintain their own survival, that is theft.
Mr. Strawman, give me a break.
You know, this is the first time I've ever put that clip on standby because I knew just by reading the title that I was going to need it. Anyway, that's pretty much all for this video. He goes on to say nothing which he hasn't already presented. So, in conclusion, anarcho-capitalism is still voluntary, and no amount of autistic screeching can change the logical objectivity of a solid ethic.